Welcome to the Vision for Life podcast, an ongoing conversation between the pastors of Fellowship Denver and the church at large. Each week, we talk about life, faith, the Bible, and how to follow Jesus as we go about our daily lives. I'm Autumn, the host of the podcast, and Hunter's joining me for today's episode. Hunter, welcome.
Books Part 2.
That's right.
Last year, I think we accidentally did 2 episodes because we were just going through our books and we looked up and we have a little clock that runs while we're recording. You know, we could see it. And we looked up at the clock is like an hour and 10 minutes.
Yep.
And we're like, we're not anywhere close to being done. And we were suddenly like, it's going to be 2 episodes. Let's make it 2 episodes. You know, we kind of made that decision on the fly. So this year it's intentional. And I was impressed. We did the first half in like 45 minutes or so.
Yeah, it was pretty good.
Yeah, hopefully people don't fall asleep.
I trust that people want to hear about our best reads of the year because they say so. Because a lot of our listeners tell me that they like these episodes.
Well, that's good.
So we're picking up with part 2 of our best reads of the year. And in episode 1, we covered 3 categories: spiritual life, theology and Bible, and biography and history.
And by you didn't have anything in biography and history. And so I shamed you a little bit. I was a little bit heavy-handed in that. But I wonder if you've had time to rectify that since we've talked last.
You know, I have not read any books between our last episode and this one.
Okay.
Yep. So, no, I haven't. You're just going to have to wait until we record this again in 2026 and see how I did and determine whether or not you're going to be ashamed of my lack of reading in that category. So, yeah. Well, I do have some books in the categories that we're going to cover today. That is, unless you decided to add some to the children's.
No, in fact, you may carry some weight on several
section?
of these. Yeah, you may carry our weight on several of these.
Well, we are starting out with a category that we call general interest, which, as it sounds, is just sort of our catch-all category. The books that were great but don't really fit into the other genres. So we have a book here listed that you submitted, Hunter, that is called Summer of Our Discontent. So tell us about that book. I'm sure you'll want to also share the full title.
Yeah.
But
well, the subtitle is The Age of Certainty and the Demise of Discourse. This is by Thomas Chatterton Williams. Thomas Chatterton Williams is an African-American writer, writes a lot in the Atlantic, and lives in Paris. So he kind of is a participant in American culture, but also from afar, sits on the left of
Is he American?
Yes.
Okay, he's living in Paris.
American, but lives in Paris, and sits on the left of political and cultural spectrum. And I found this book fascinating. I think I started to see some reviews of it in the New York Times, and I saw one at the Gospel Coalition. I was seeing it pop up in various diverse kind of media, giving some attention to this book when it came out in 2025. And so I picked it up, and it is a critique of progressive ideas from someone who's on that end of the spectrum. And I always find it fascinating when someone is critiquing their own party or their own end of the ideological spectrum as opposed to someone on the other end of the ideological spectrum. Now, to say that, I think there are some critiques that the right makes of leftist orthodoxies, you might say, that are very valid. And I'm more conservative, so I probably more identify with that side of the spectrum, and culturally, politically, and philosophically. So he's not making the same critiques necessarily that I would make as someone who is more conservative, but he is making critiques as someone who sits on the left and sees problems in his own movement, and I think that's pretty fascinating. And there were several times where I wanted to say, man, I'm actually glad that you're seeing this and you're giving voice to it, because I think it's a message that needs to be heard by people on the left, and they're probably more likely to consider it coming from an articulate, thoughtful, intelligent one of their own, so to speak, right? Okay, the summer of our discontent is the summer of 2020, and he orients this around, think about what's going on in 2020. We had the COVID lockdowns. Then we had the murder of George Floyd and all that came out of that. And and we had this real kind of racial reckoning that was happening in America. There was a lot of talk about anti-racist ideologies, systemic racism. That was all kind of happening. What he's noticing, and again, he would be very good to notice this as someone who kind of swims in that stream, is he's noticing there were ideas emerging on the left that were inconsistent with previous ideas on the left, and that was causing some of our cultural tension. So he notices, for example, a difference between how Obama talked about race, and how Ta-Nehisi Coates, who really came to prominence he was writing before 2020, but he really got a lot of attention in 2020. And he notices, for example, Coates's vision of the future of race in America is much darker, more pessimistic, not hopeful at all. It's kind of a Manichaean, one's going to win, the other's going to lose kind of perspective. And Obama's was much more like based on universal principles of justice. We should all be able to live together, much more in like the MLK tradition. And he's saying, look, those are not the same things. And he's concerned that the darker vision is winning, in his side of the culture war. I'm concerned about that too. I noticed a lot of really well-intentioned people, some of them Christians, who in the name of, racial justice started to pick up on a lot of the ideas that were being written about in anti-racist literature. And those ideas are, I think, corrosive to creating a society that holds together. And I think they were very corrosive to churches that embraced them. I can remember thinking when that was happening, and I read some of those books. I read Ta-Nehisi Coates. I read Robin DiAngelo. I read some of that, and I remember thinking, I don't understand all of this in terms of how it maps onto previous, like MLK's idea of racial justice. I don't understand all of this well enough to talk about it publicly or to teach about it, but I do have a sense that something's really off here, and I want to not let this become a dominant idea in our church. And I'm just gonna play some defense against this stuff, even if I don't completely understand it. And Thomas Chatterton Williams is telling me why that was a good instinct, right? He's explaining that. So he, in some ways, he skewers, like he mounts up evidence of like things, groupthink that happened on the left, and he just quotes people. Here's what they said. Here's what they said. Here's what they said. And then he comes back and surveys it from 4 or 5 years down the road, and he goes, and that was wrong. And I appreciate that kind of honest reckoning. So fantastic, interesting, read. He gets into some of the mass protests that happened and the public health debates we were having around COVID. And he's like honest, like, look, we were telling people you have to shelter indoors. You can't get out and mix and mingle. And then he's like, but then we're like, but if you want to protest, it's okay. And it's like, that doesn't make any sense. And that kind of inconsistency was making people rightly angry and go crazy. And I think it's a message that the left needs to hear. There is real tension on the American left. There's tension on both sides of the political spectrum within the two parties, but there's real tension on the left between two different visions of what their future should be. And I think for the good of our greater body politic, even if I don't agree with either one of those visions, I'm hopeful. I'm more hopeful that one wins than the other, because I think that the more traditional liberalism is more compatible with the history and the future of America than the darker liberalism that he's kind of critiquing in this book. Anyway, that's long-winded, but it's a fascinating read, and some things started to connect for me that I had not been able to connect before. And so to our listeners who like to think about where our culture is and what some of the different factions and ideas are within our culture, I would certainly commend it.
No, I didn't think that was long-winded, Hunter. I was tracking, and it sounds fascinating. Sounds like it was helpful to you to think through some of that. It's interesting to, right during 2020 and in 2021, as we were still grappling with and dealing with and living under various restrictions caused by COVID, or the realities of COVID and commenting that in a few years we would start to read reflective literature that was looking back on those years, 2020 particularly, but that whole COVID era, and not only the particular restraints of COVID, but all of the things that you just mentioned, those other political tensions as well. And that we would start to read people's different interpretations of it. And so it's interesting to hear you now talk about that era kind of reflectively through this book that you read. But do you think that as a progressive, Thomas Chatterton Williams, that his purpose in writing this book is to contribute to the conversation in a way that he hopes would enact change in the left portion of the political spectrum as you were describing it?
Yeah, I do. I think he's primarily speaking to his own side of the spectrum. Mm-hmm. I don't think he's trying to make apologies, to the right or to conservatives that they would appreciate. Although I have noticed some conservatives applauding his work and appreciating his critiques, even if they would make slightly different critiques. I think he's trying to speak to his own folks in a way that they would come to terms with, and I know from some friends who are on that side of the spectrum, and some are personal friends and some are just people that I've had a chance to talk with and interact with that wouldn't maybe even know me today, right? There is real, some would say infighting, and others would just say debate, whatever you want to call it, going on the left side. And there's a real tussle between those who want a more identitarian understanding of politics, like it's really about getting certain groups in power and kicking other groups out of power, and those who want a view of politics that's based more on universal principles of justice, human rights, these kinds of things. And so that's happening on the left. I think those who are more classically liberal are really worried that the more identity politics vision is winning, or it has the most power on their side of the spectrum, and they're adjusting accordingly.
Well, interesting. We will move on to our next book in this category, which is one that I read and listed. It's called A Walk in the Park, The True Story of a Spectacular Misadventure in the Grand Canyon. And it's by Kevin Fedarko. Kevin Fedarko is an acclaimed outdoor writer. He has written for a lot of notable magazines and periodicals, among them National Geographic. And this particular book came about because of an assignment that he and his friend Pete Davison were sent on for National Geographic, or that they asked to be sent on for National Geographic.
Pete Davison, the comedian?
No, he's a photographer.
Okay.
Yep. Same name, different guy. So as I looked back on my reading for 2025, I think that one of the themes of my reading this year was the American frontier, or the Western United States. And that theme was evident sometimes in the subject matter, sometimes in the setting. So for instance, I read one of Wallace Stegner's novels this year, and many of his are set in the Western United States, but he also grew up in the western half of the United States, spent some of his childhood in Canada. But a lot of his time growing up was spent in the western half of the United States. So, and then different authors who either were shaped by the American West or wrote about the American West, or like this book, it's a nonfiction book, but it was set also in a Western landscape. And as I was thinking about that theme that took shape in my reading this year, I had also just had this thought continuously as I was selecting books to read, and continued to gravitate towards these sorts of books, novels and nonfiction books that had this theme, that were about or set in the western half of the United States. I realized, not this is a new thought to me, but how much I've been shaped by that, and how this sense of home really is present with me.
You grew up in this part of the world.
I did. I grew up in this part of the world, and the sense of home is with me, though. Really, when I have been in many different places in the western part of the United States. So something about it that has shaped me and formed me, and that I love, and that really my soul feels at ease in these sorts of landscapes. And I so enjoyed listening to descriptions of the vastness of the West, of the dry climate, and how that impacts the people and the animals and the plant life. And so it was something that was true in this book, and was a theme that really stood out to me as I looked back on my reading.
Well, I'm a transplant, and I love it too. And when I go back east, I guess I can say that as someone who goes to like Arkansas and Alabama. When I go back east and come back, I'm just like, oh, I just love the big blue sky and the dry air. And I might have come by this honestly. My dad is a lover of the American West, and he knows the history really well. So he would probably really love this book as well. Over Thanksgiving, my dad and one of my brothers and I were driving from Arkansas to Alabama after a fishing trip, and we had like an 8-hour drive in the car, and inevitably, somehow something about the settling of the West comes up, Lewis and Clark, and my dad just starts narrating their route. He's like, well, then they went here, and then they went here, and then he's like, and this river flows into this river, which flows to this river, and that feeds down to this river down here, and that turns. And I was like, and he's just talking like I know that, and I'm like, the map's not even making sense in my mind. I'm just like nodding along, going, yeah. But my dad loves the history of the West, the frontier. He loves driving across the West. I feel like every year he finds some excuse to drive out west for a couple of weeks, and exploring it. And so I've picked that up from him, watching him, as a boy, watching him think about that. And now as someone who lives in the West, I'm like, I get it. I get it. It's just, it's the best part of America.
Yeah, it is. It is pretty wonderful. And this particular book covers Kevin Fedarko's 750-mile transect of the Grand Canyon National Park. And so the author had worked as a boatman, taking tourists on trips down the river through the canyon. And then he decided, because his friend Pete convinced him that they should take on this assignment, he decided to do this through hike of Grand Canyon National Park, which is something that very, very few people can claim that they have done. And he, of course, is an outdoorsman. These are the types of assignments he goes on. But he writes the book with a lot of humor and represents just initially how poorly he and his friend were prepared to take on something of this magnitude. And so there are a lot of humorous stories, but he also clearly writes with a love for the land and for the human and animal inhabitants who call the park home. And he acknowledges the complicated historical realities of establishing the boundaries of a national park. So how so many of our national parks and the expansion of the United States, especially in the American West, was at the expense of the native inhabitants, the Native Americans who had called that land home for centuries, millennia in some cases. And so he writes with an acknowledgement that the historical realities that created Grand Canyon National Park are complicated, and at the same time, it's because of the establishment of our national parks, and Grand Canyon National Park in particular, that the land is protected, and that now some of that land has been directly given back to some of the Native American inhabitants who do call it home. And so he beautifully acknowledges all of these existing complexities and writes with a really particular kind of descriptive prose about the hike, but the landscape itself. And through his journey, he reflects on friendship, interdependence, and the theme of family as well. He mentions that as he was undertaking this transect, doing it in various sections, that at the same time, his dad was undergoing cancer treatment for advanced cancer. And so he was traveling back and forth and feeling at certain times the pull of needing to do this, both what he had committed to for his work and because he wanted to, and wishing that he could be present with his dad, and at the same time knowing that his dad was cheering him on and really wanted him to do this, to complete the hike. And in the end, the very conclusion of the book, he's reflecting on how his dad taught him and his brother to see beauty in their surrounding landscape. And he talks about growing up in Pennsylvania, outside of Pittsburgh, and relaying that it was nothing like, of course, Grand Canyon National Park, but that his dad had seen it in a particular way, and he was musing over why was his dad able to see such beauty even in that place, that now Kevin Fedarko, who has traveled extensively and seen magnificent landscapes all over the globe, how was it, he was asking, that his dad could see that same kind of beauty in where they lived, right outside of Pittsburgh. And then he says he doesn't acknowledge it directly. He doesn't talk about Christianity, but in the end he says that it was because his dad deeply believed that someday all of creation would be made new. And so he acknowledges that it's his dad's perspective on that it sounds like is from a theologically biblical worldview.
It does.
That really gave his dad and then ultimately Kevin the ability to appreciate the land that God has created in this particular way. So it also, even though it's humorous and beautiful, it's a great reflection on family and the people and places that shape us. So it was a fun read and was easy to read and fun to read and moved quickly and also fit right in with my theme, reading about the Western United States. All right, Hunter, what is the next book that you have in this category?
Thanks for representing the West. The West feels underrepresented in my reading this year, and that's something I want to remedy in the year ahead. So, thanks for motivating me. I put a book called From Strength to Strength by Arthur Brooks on here, and this sits in the space of kind of life wisdom, life advice, self-help kind of a book. It's the big idea is this: success in midlife, from like 40 on, success in midlife comes from a different kind of strength than success early in life. And he's particularly looking at this through like a career perspective. So he talks about the difference between what he calls fluid intelligence and what he calls crystallized intelligence. And fluid intelligence is the kind of intelligence that makes fresh, innovative discoveries. It solves problems, big novel problems. And he's done some research, and he cites some research that shows in a lot of fields of work, most of the breakthrough kind of work is done by younger people in that field. So the invention of new approaches to doing this is done by younger people in the field, mastering what he's calling fluid intelligence. And then there's for many professionals, there's a whole next section of their career, which is not necessarily is marked by fresh discovery and breakthrough. And actually many people just kind of wilt and give out during that second phase. They just kind of play the schedule out. They lose energy and they lose steam, but they still kind of need to make a paycheck. So they just keep doing what they've always done, right? Or they keep reaching for fresh discoveries and not really having any. But he says there's a second kind of intelligence called crystallized, and it's taking what you've already learned and figuring out how it all integrates and fits together, and then being able to pass that on in a way that represents true wisdom, that the younger folks may not have mastered yet. And so you become kind of a representative of wisdom that has really been hard won by learning lots of different things and integrating them and bringing them together. He calls that crystallized intelligence. And the title From Strength to Strength means like long-term impact comes by first having one kind of strength, the breakthrough fluid kind of intelligence strength. And then as that typically begins to wane, actually cultivating the second strength, which is the crystallized intelligence. I think, as I was reading this, I kept thinking, I'm in a vocation where wisdom is valuable. As a pastor, wisdom is valuable. Now, the first kind of fluid intelligence strength is also really valuable. That's what I'd use to plant a church, right? So I was thinking about it personally for where I am in life. I also thought a lot about Tim Keller, who has been a kind of a pastor that I've looked up to for a long time. I think Keller had did a lot of innovative church work in his early years to plant Redeemer Church in New York City, and then I noticed from about age 50 on, he wrote a lot, and that was really cashing in what Arthur Brooks would call his crystallized intelligence. So I think I've seen an obvious example of this playing out. And I jokingly said, that's the book Napoleon needed. He needed to know after his successes and conquest of youth that he needed to make a shift. But he didn't. He invaded Russia.
But he didn't. He invaded Russia. He didn't know about crystallized intelligence.
He didn't know. He needed that book. Would have told him. It would have said, don't invade Russia. Page 1 would have been, don't invade Russia. You're not the same person you were when you were 28 years old.
Hunter, I think I remember that the title for this book came from a verse in Psalms. Is that in a psalm?
I'm not remembering that, but it could. I think Arthur Brooks may be working out of a Christian perspective. He is trying to translate it into more general wisdom categories. So he talks about the value of spirituality in the book, but it's kind of presented in pretty generic terms, like you need to come to terms with your spirituality. It's not Christological. But yes, I do think he draws on Old Testament literature. So I'd have to go check that. Yeah,
I think so. I think we can fact check this. I can look it up here. But I think that the phrase itself, from strength to strength, is from Psalm 84, which is describing pilgrims progressing on their journey to Zion and saying that they move from strength to strength, that they grow stronger with each step.
Yes, that's it.
And are prepared to appear before God. I think that that's the context of the psalm.
That's exactly right.
It's interesting. Just interesting to me that he chose that as the inspiration for the
metaphor,
title.
Yeah. Well, are we going to go on and do children's books now?
I think so.
Okay, now I've got some more to do. I've got some more to do next year. Although
that's right.
I will always every year I'll
recommend
recommend Policeman Small. Policeman Small is a traffic cop. He tells the cars when to go and stop, and he does a lot of things during the day. He directs traffic. Some milk gets spilled, and some kittens come and lick it up. And Policeman Small helps those kittens. I think he rescues someone out of a tree, or a cat, a dog, or something out of a tree. He does a lot of good things, and I checked that book out of the library over and over and over again when I was a kid. So
back when you believed in libraries.
Back when my Meemaw believed in the library.
That's right. Yep. Well, your Meemaw was right, Hunter. She was right.
So that's my contribution. What do you have?
I think that is becoming a bit in this particular episode that you mentioned Policeman Small.
Well, I've given
year.
Policeman Small to several kids.
Well, I feel slightly ashamed of you for not reading any children's.
If you invite me to your 3-year-old birthday party, I'm going to find Policeman Small and bring him with me. That's what I'm going to
do. Great. Everyone hear that? Invite Hunter to your 3-year-old's birthday party, and he will bring a copy of Policeman Small. Not a library copy, a copy that they can keep.
There are some library copies out there now that you can buy.
All right. Well, in this category, Hunter would like to submit Policeman Small. And I have a couple books that I was going to mention. The category of children's literature is huge, and there are many, many really great children's books that we could mention, whether they're older or newly released. So a couple that I selected this year, there are two that kind of go hand in hand. They're just written about the same thing, but from a slightly different perspective, by Kristen Getty, who is a musician, a Grammy-nominated singer. And she wrote two children's books. One is called We Sing, and one is called Pippa and the Singing Tree, Joining the Song of All Creation. And these are for preschool to elementary children. That's the age they're in for. You could certainly read them to toddlers, but probably your upper elementary kids will be aging out of these particular books. But both We Sing and Pippa and the Singing Tree talk about the fact that God gave us the gift of our voices and that Scripture instructs us to sing. And at the end of We Sing, there's a note to parents, and I thought it was so well done. And the reason I wanted to recommend these books is that from time to time, Adam Anglin, our worship pastor here at Fellowship, and I talk about encouraging singing in our services. And it's an area that I think Fellowship has room to grow in. Being comfortable, everyone being comfortable, just lifting their voices and singing together without worrying about what we sound like or keeping the time perfectly, but just enjoying, utilizing the gift of our voices that God has given us. And God also instructs us to sing. There are verses throughout Scripture in the Old Testament, specifically given to the Israelites, and then in the New Testament, even encouraging the church to sing together. And there's something about it, about vocalizing these truths together in song, doing it corporately, that actually helps us think through the truths that we sing about in a different way. So I thought these books were cute. They're done well. The artwork is fun. So the illustrations are really fun and engaging, and I loved the message contained in them. I thought it was a good word for kids to just enjoy using their voices to sing. And in Pippa and the Singing Tree, Pippa uses her voice to join in the symphony of nature that God created. It's really sweet and a good encouragement. So I thought this would be a fun thing for parents to be able to read with their kids and then sing with them, whatever it is. Sing along with your kids in the car, play music and sing with it. When they join you in the service on Sundays, sing out loud. It's a beautiful example to them. So that was why I recommended these two books. Mm-hmm. And then there was one other book that I included in this category that was one that I just personally enjoyed this year. It's called Colorado 50 Hikes with Kids. And you can find no shortage of these sorts of kids books, but this one is really well done. Maybe one of the best.
Are they hikes that your kids could actually finish?
They are.
Or kids, I mean, your kids are getting older now, but the kids could finish?
That kids could actually finish. So they are all hikes in Colorado that are 5 miles or less. So most of them are less than 5 miles. And in each little section, it describes the hike, gives you a small trail map, and then tells your kids things to watch for along the trail. So in some of the sections, there are scavenger hunts. It explains some of the flora and fauna, some of the animal life that you could watch for. And so once again, there are many books kind of like this, but this one was put together really well and was actually really useful. Like Ivy, my 9-year-old, enjoyed looking in it. And there are some of the hikes are divided into sections by area of the state. So it will suggest like Front Range hikes. And those were mostly the ones that we were able to do together. But she liked looking at it too and gave her a kind of sense of ownership reading that little section and then being able to go on the hike. So we will link to that. But parents, that was a fun one and would be even a fun gift for your kids if your family enjoys hiking together. Or maybe this would be an encouragement to do that and give you a sense of where to go, what would be a good hike to do with your kids. Well, that concludes our children's literature section. We'll link to Policeman Small.
Yes, please do.
We will.
It's a little board book now, and I don't remember that from growing up. So I'm like, what's happened to Policeman Small? I think they've dumbed him down.
Oh, dear.
You know?
Sometimes the book itself, like the entire contents of the book, are the same. It's just put in board book format so that when you read it with younger kids and they try to eat it, they're less successful.
There you go.
At eating it.
Well, it says like ages 1 to 3, and I'm like, well, I read that until I was 12 years old. I loved it.
Well, our last category, which has quite a few submissions, our last category, so it will still take us a moment to get through this, but this is our final category for Best Books of the Year 2025, Fiction and Literature. And Hunter somehow managed to squeeze 3 volumes into his first selection of this one.
I read this trilogy, this fiction trilogy called The Lord of the Rings. And I don't know if anyone's heard of this, so I should probably give a little summary. The worlds are like the power of evil. There's this Dark Lord, and there's all these different kinds of, creatures that are trying to work together. There's wizards, and there's elves, and there's men, and there's dwarves, and there's ents, which are like tree people, but there's these half-sized creatures called hobbits. And one of these hobbits, this little half-sized man, he inherits the responsibility for breaking the power of evil, which is embodying this ring, this one ring to rule them all. And he has to try to make a journey to this place called Mount Doom and stick that ring in the fire and melt it away, And all the wizards and the dwarves and the men and the elves and the ents, they all help him along the journey. And he has a couple hobbit friends that go along too. And then he has to go the final bit alone. And the ring corrupts people who carry it. So the big thing is is he going to finish this journey before he loses his own soul? And I won't spoil the ending, So anyway, that's
good.
it.
Thank you.
I highly recommend people check this out. I jokingly said, am I even a pastor? I haven't read this, but this summer I would tell people it was one of my sabbatical reading projects. In fact, it took about all of sabbatical. I just slowly made my way through it. It's not fast, and I would tell people I was reading it, and it was like a little litmus test to determine, are you a nerd or are you like a normal person? Because the nerds, including one of my brothers, just come out of the woodwork, They're so excited that you're reading Lord of the Rings, and they explain it to you, which is great. They explain to me what's happening. And what all was going on. I missed so much of what was actually happening. In all seriousness, it's a fantastic story. Mm-hmm. It's incredibly written. And I appreciate now that I can pick up all the references to it that pervade our popular discourse. It's almost like you start shopping for a car and you suddenly start seeing that car everywhere. That's kind of what I'm experiencing with Lord of the Rings. It's always been there. I just didn't know.
All these references.
Yeah, they all went right over my head. So I feel like I'm a participant in the life of the world now.
Good. I'm very happy for you.
It was great.
And did you audiobook that one at all?
No,
read
did not
it?
Audiobook that at all. I read that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. There is a fantastic audiobook recording of The Hobbit that Ivy and I
I've heard all the audiobooks are good.
Listened to together this year. That was one of the things that Ivy and I listened to on audiobook together this year.
Okay.
So I'm sure I have read Lord of the Rings. I have not audiobooked them, so I can't speak to that. But the recording of The Hobbit is excellent.
Okay, good. Now I have not read The Hobbit yet, so I heard that's the easiest of the 4 to read.
Yes. Yeah. So maybe even though you don't have sabbatical this coming year, maybe you can
read The Hobbit, yeah.
Include The Hobbit in your 2026 reading.
I'll take that under advisement.
Well, the nenext book in this category is one that I listed that I don't think needs a lot of explanation because similarly to The Lord of the Rings, people are probably somewhat familiar with it. But it's Till We Have Faces by C.S. Lewis. And it was one of Lewis's books that I just had not read. So similarly to what you were saying about Lord of the Rings, Hunter, I hadn't read Till We Have Faces.
I haven't read this either.
So... well, it was excellent. It was great. I did receive some good advice before I read it from one of our listeners, someone who attends Fellowship Denver, who listens to the podcast periodically, and who I talk to here and there about books. I said that this was the next up on my reading list, and he suggested that I brush up on the Greek myth that it's based on before I read the book.
You did that?
I did that, and I just Googled it. I just looked up some information. It's based on the Greek myth of Cupid and Psyche, and so Till We Have Faces is a retelling of that myth, but from a different perspective. So from a perspective not represented in the original myth.
Okay.
It's picking up on the story from the perspective of the older sister of Psyche, who is one of the main characters in the original Greek myth. And so it's a retelling of the story, but from this older sister's perspective. And it is well done. It feels like reading a C.S. Lewis book. and I'm really glad to have read it. It was a great read. And I'm glad that I listened to the advice to read up on the Greek myth first. It helped me understand and track with the story, definitely having done that first. So from the perspective of this older sister who is a queen, the story tracks through her own realization that she's blaming Psyche, her younger sister, and Cupid for her own state and her own misery, but she comes to a realization that her own possessive love was the real cause of her misery. And she's, through the story, comes to understand what true love and sacrifice mean. So it's very well done. It's engaging and an enjoyable, challenging read. So I'm glad that I included it in my reading this year.
Well, I appreciate that summary. I'm a little. My C.S. Lewis relationship is a little bit like my Tolkien relationship. It's underdeveloped, proportionate to my vocation, and so I need to do some more C.S. Lewis work too. In fact, I had this decision kind of tree on sabbatical, which was, do I read all the Lord of the Rings or do I really dive deep into C.S. Lewis? I was going to do one or the other, knowing that I probably couldn't do both. And so maybe next sabbatical we'll read the C.S. Lewis sabbatical. Yeah.
Maybe so. I don't know if he has any multi-volume works that you can.
No, but I talked to someone who had done sabbatical a couple of years ago, and one of his projects was he just bought all of C.S. Lewis's like nonfiction works and read them all on sabbatical. I thought that's a great idea.
All right, next sabbatical.
Yeah.
Well, the next book in this category, Hunter, is one that we both listed, but I want to give you the chance to give us the summary.
Well, we did several episodes on Silas Marner, the Weaver of Revelot, to quote one of our former coworkers, Randy McQueen. We worked the fuzz off that tennis ball.
We sure did.
I would have a tendency. I was a young pastor. Randy was like an older guy who was retired and helping us run operations of the church. It was such a gift in that season. And when I would just be obsessed about something or I'd be like overthinking a problem, he would just look at me and he'd go, "Quit working the fuzz off the tennis ball. Just make a decision." And so anyway, we've discussed Silas Marner at length, but it still stands as a fantastic book about the power of vulnerability and our tendency to protect ourselves and the need we have for other people and the willingness to open up and tell people we need help and inviting people into our lives and the transformative power of that. So I love these themes. This did inspire me to start Middlemarch, her longer novel, and so I'm about halfway through Middlemarch. That'll make it on next year's reading list. I don't put it on the list until the year I finish it. So if it's a straddler, if it's a year straddler like Middlemarch is going to be, then it's going to be a 2026 read. But Middlemarch took me a little bit to get into, and now I'm loving it. I'm halfway through it, and I'm loving it.
Mm-hmm. You were reading me some selections from Middlemarch the other day.
I was. I just read it. We have a preaching team. Like, we're preparing the next sermon series. We were kind of coordinating our messages, and I was like, "Listen to this, guys. This is a perfect illustration." And I cracked open my Middlemarch on Kindle and read them some stuff, and they were like, "Wow, that's really good." And I'm like, "See?"
And many of you read Silas Marner and tracked through it with us and sent in some excellent questions. So I enjoyed the book, but part of what I enjoyed was reading it with you, Hunter, and discussing it, and then having various conversations with the people who were reading through it with us. That makes you pay attention in a different way to a lot of the things in the book. And it was so fun to receive some comments and hear questions that our listeners had who had picked up on certain things in the book. So that was a particularly fun read this year. The next book that we have listed in this category, even though Hunter was ashamed of my lack of reading biography this year, and I'm slightly ashamed of him for not reading any children's books in the last many years, this area, reading fiction, is actually for the last several years. Prior to 2025, I had not read very much fiction. And in 2025, I read several different novels. And that was fun. It was a fun change of pace this year. And a lot of those novels were actually because, as I mentioned before, often I'll have something that makes its way across my path a few times. And then if a person has a conversation with me and recommends it again, then it kind of tips the scales for me. And I'll put it on my, okay, I would like to read that list. And this next book is called Ordinary Grace. It's by William Kent Kruger. And this book was, I read it because I had seen it, read a little bit about it, and then a podcast listener actually sent me and friend actually sent this title to me and said, I think you need some reading suggestions, and shared this particular one with me. And it was great. It was a great read this year. It is not set in the western half of the United States. It's set in a small town in Minnesota, and it is narrated by a 13-year-old, so 13-year-old Frank Drum, and he's recalling one particular summer in which tragedy struck his family and the town. But because it's written in the voice of his 13-year-old self, the observations that he's making from that perspective are interesting. So interesting as he's living through these events. But then at the end of the novel, he's looking back, and you can hear him in an adult voice reflecting on the themes of loss and faith and guilt, and particularly on the quiet forms of grace that emerged in his life because of the suffering that his family endured that summer, and then because of how that shaped his life and his family from that point on. And as he looks back from an older, wiser perspective, he sees that through tragedy, grace surfaced, and that his family experienced a particular sort of miracle in a really ordinary way that summer, and that impacted the rest of his life. So it was a great read this year. I really enjoyed it. And apparently, I mean, William Kent Kruger has written other novels, but this is the only book of his I have ever read. And in reading a few reviews of this book, it sounds like the way in which this novel was written is slightly different for this particular author, not quite his norm. But I can't speak to that directly because this is the only book of his that I've read. But I was grateful for the suggestion and really enjoyed this book this year. All right, Hunter, you have the next one on our list in this category.
I have the book Master and Commander by Patrick O'Brien. And Master and Commander is the first in a 21-volume series of sailing novels set during the Napoleonic War. And the main characters are Jack Aubrey and Stephen Maturin. Jack Aubrey is the captain of the ship, and Maturin is the surgeon of the ship. In this first volume, Aubrey is just taking command of HMS Sophie, and he hires Maturin to be the ship's surgeon, and it's really about their friendship and them kind of turning this ragamuffin crew of men into a working crew, that wins battles in the Napoleonic Wars. So this book was fascinating because it just dropped me into a world that I did not know anything about, and the author, Patrick O'Brien, is so versed in that world, and there's a ton of jargon that you don't know what it means, and some of it I Google so I can kind of track along, but it's impossible really to Google all of it without just taking forever to read the book. So some of it you're just like, I'm just going to hang on and pay attention to the relationships and try to figure out what's going on. So it was a little bit more of a perplexing, difficult read than I maybe first imagined this was going to be. It wasn't. The setting would also change from chapter to chapter, but it wasn't clear what the new setting was. So you kind of had to. Yeah, it was kind of like being in a movie where you're like, now who's related to who and what's going on here? So internet research about the book and about the terminology helped me to kind of piece together the story. It's not terribly long. I did think, I don't know if I have 20 more volumes of this in me. Some people just love this, I think I would like to read another one and see if it I pick up steam as I go. But the funny thing is, I've been thinking about it a lot since I finished it, and I've been thinking in like naval and sailing metaphors a lot. Now, I'm wrong half the time. I'll use one of them, but someone who really understands that will be like, well, actually, it's like this. And so, but even that's kind of fun. I kind of get corrected by the sailors, by the sailing nerds.
If it was a little bit of a difficult read or a bit of a stretch, but you listed it on your best reads of the year, is it because of what you just said that you keep thinking about it?
Exactly
that it stuck
right.
with you?
Exactly right. It's so memorable, and it was enjoyable in a strange way, but a way I didn't necessarily think it was going to be, to start out.
Yeah, well, this book is also responsible not only for you thinking here and there in seafaring metaphors, but for you trying some of them out on us.
That's what I'm saying. And I tried one of them out in a member meeting. And someone was like, he raised his head. He's like, I can explain that to you, And then afterwards he came up. He's like, it really works like this and like this. And I was like, oh, thanks.
All right. Well, the next book on our list in this category, we have just two more to close out our conversation, and two more.
These are both yours?
They are. They're both my submissions to best reads of the year. And this book, Death Comes for the Archbishop by Willa Cather, is this was easy to pick. As I look back over my whole list, I thought,
this is your favorite book of the year?
Maybe.
Okay.
Maybe it was my favorite read of the year.
When we were talking about this, I ordered the book, so I'll have a copy for me whenever I decide to read it at home.
Yeah, this book is set in, it's set in the mid 1800s, and it's set in New Mexico.
In the American West.
And I enjoyed really everything about this book, but one of the themes in the book that resonated with me so deeply was the setting, the description of the landscape. And this is I think it's an epic sort of story of a single human life that is lived simply and quietly. So the story is about a French priest, Father Jean-Marie Latour, who is appointed to serve as the apostolic vicar to New Mexico, so to the territory of New Mexico. And so he travels from Europe and is dropped into this desert landscape. And he has to learn the landscape and learn the people and figure out how to shepherd all of his priests. And so he gets to know the Mexican inhabitants and the Native American inhabitants of the land. And he quietly, faithfully shepherds these people and spreads his faith and deepens his convictions about his calling and about his commitment to this task that he's been given. And he loves the people, and he deals with various kinds of difficulties through the landscape, through people who don't know how to be led in the way that he's been tasked with leading them. And he deals with his own loneliness. And he has one friend who is with him through all of this. And it's just a beautiful vision of life unfolding in a place that seemed sort of untouched by everything else going on in the United States at the time.
You are selling this.
And so it was beautiful. I would definitely read it again. And this was recommended to me, I have to say, shout out to Anna, who's on our staff team, a friend who's on our staff team. She one day just said, hey, I think you would really enjoy this book. And so I read it and definitely did. I enjoyed it so much. I do have to give a word, though, about this novel because I was talking to a friend who attends fellowship, Rick Langer. Rick has also been on the podcast in the past when we were interviewing him about a book that he read. Rick was a university professor. He taught college students for many, many, many years. He's well read. He's very well spoken. And Rick and I were talking about books, and he said he really, really enjoys a novel that has a particular, like that the story develops and it has this climactic sort of event. And this novel, Death Comes for the Archbishop, is not like that. It's not that sort of story. It's the drama is in the landscape and the various challenges that come into Father Jean-Marie's life. It's not a particular like climactic event. So the nature of this novel, I think I would describe it as quiet, like his life, and beautiful. And it was different than many books that I've read. But similarly to what you were saying about Master and Commander, this book stuck with me. And I keep thinking about it and turning it kind of over and over in my mind. So
it reminds me of Middlemarch in that respect. It's the drama is the normal kind of human drama that happens, sometimes inside of us and sometimes relationally in between people. That's not explosive. It's not dramatic in the sense of a big event, but it is the real stuff that many of us wrestle with. So, yeah.
So that was probably my favorite read this year.
Well, you did a good job selling that, and I appreciate the qualifier you gave there. Now you're going to close us out.
I have one more book to recommend.
I have heard about this book, but I've not read it. But someone recommended it to me.
Yes,
this summer. In fact, the same lady who recommended Silas Marner. Rachel Moore recommended Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan.
Well, Rachel and I seem to like some of the same sorts of books.
Yeah. Rachel is Irish, so she was trying to sell me the Irish.
Yes.
Yeah.
Claire Keegan is Irish, an Irish author. She also has authored other books, but Small Things Like These is a short book. I think in some places it's described as a novella, and it is set in Ireland in the winter of 1985, and I want to encourage anyone who just needs a good read over these next few weeks. So Christmas, New Year's, at the beginning of the year, to consider picking up this little book and reading it. It will only take you a few hours, and it is both poignant and challenging in the best sort of way. But it's written excellently with Claire Keegan has interesting prose, maybe that is somewhat derived from her Irish upbringing or descent, or the way that she represents, though, the interactions taking place. I can envision, even though I haven't really spent time to speak of in Ireland, but I can envision it so clearly. But it is in a pretty understated way, so not flowery, and it makes you really feel the setting in a way that is so vivid. Like it's not flowery, but it seems so real, so true. And the story is about Bill Furlong, a coal merchant and a family man and a good citizen who is raised in a small Irish town. He still lives there. He's raising his own family there. And in this one winter, he's forced through various events to confront his past and to reckon with his present situation through something that he discovers at the local convent, which also functions as a mother-baby home. So I don't want to give away too much of the story, but it's a short read. It is a great Christmas time read. The setting is in the winter, so it feels fitting to read during the winter and over Christmas, and I really loved it.
Well, thanks for giving us some inspiration on the fiction category. These are last two are both intriguing to me.
All right, Hunter. Well, here's to another year of reading.
That's right. We've already got to jump on it with Middlemarch.
Maybe Mark Twain will be for me a straddler. Maybe I'll start it in 2025 yet.
Maybe you will. Maybe you will.
Maybe I will. Maybe it'll make it into my best reads of 2026.
I hope so.
All right. Well, Hunter, I love always talking about reading with you. And these episodes, when we reflect on the reading that we've done during our year, are really enjoyable. So
super fun.
We'll link to Hunter's Substack. Also, we mentioned that in our first episode. Hunter typed up his best reads of the year. We'll include links to all of these books in the description to today's podcast, and then also link to Hunter's Substack, in which he wrote about his best reads of the year. And to those of you listening, thank you for tracking along with us. We hope that you have had a great year too of reading and would love to know what were your best reads of the year. What would you recommend? What should we put on our list for 2026? We love hearing from you, and you can send those suggestions and book recommendations along with any questions you have or suggestions about what you'd like to hear us discuss on the podcast in the future to podcast@fellowshipdenver.org. Thanks for joining us on the Vision for Life podcast. Special thanks to Adam England for our theme music, to Jesse Cowan, our producer, and to Judd Connell, who provides transcription for these episodes.